She looks at it, and she goes, might be an allergic reaction to the antibiotics you have. That could be it, I guess. And then she said, or maybe you've got chicken pox. Now, my mother and I have a long-running dispute on this. She says I've never had the chicken pox. I think I have. She's probably right. Mary Ann takes her side. So Mary Ann says, if you do have the chicken pox, you've got to stay away from me because I'm pregnant. That wasn't when she first told me. I already knew that she was pregnant. Oh, okay. And actually, that was the day we were heading back. So we started to head back towards Michigan, and it was late. We got to Toledo, and the spots had spread. They were kind of getting onto my face and all over me, and we're still thinking probably an allergic reaction. I better not take the antibiotics anymore. We decided to get a hotel for the night, and Mary Ann gave me some Benadryl for the allergic reaction, and it just wasn't working, and the spots were still spreading. And so about 3 o'clock in the morning, we went to the ER in Toledo, Ohio, because she was pregnant, and we needed to know if I had chicken pox. Well, I didn't, and the doctors there figured, it sounds like this looks like an allergic reaction. So they gave me a shot of Benadryl. My wife is wonderful. She's not good with directions. So here we are in a town neither of us knows much about, at the hospital, and they gave me a shot of Benadryl, and I was having a hard time staying awake. And I couldn't drive, and somehow she found her way back to our hotel. And I went to bed. Well, we got up the next morning, traveled the rest of the way. I'm feeling miserable. I'm hungover from the Benadryl. I've got spots all over my body. I've got a big hole in my hand. And finally, our doctor back in Clare, he looks at the whole situation, puts the dots together, and says, you've got a staph infection. Oh! See, the doctor in the urgent care facility hadn't thought of that. And so when she opened up the one place on my body where the infection was, it got into my blood and spread to my whole body. Now, it would be very easy for me to say, why, God? Why have you put me through all this suffering? What's the reality? Dave, thank you. You were stupid. It goes... I've always loved your bedside manner, Tom. It goes back to the box, David, don't cut towards yourself. You see, sometimes we bring suffering on ourselves. Now, understand something. When we look at 1 Peter and the suffering that the church was going through, the suffering that Christians were going through, they had brought it on themselves. Huh? Not like me, not for being stupid, but look at this passage. Look what it says. Verse 4. They think it strange that you do not plunge with them into the same flood of dissipation. In other words, the people around you think it's odd that you no longer live like them. And what's the result of that? They heap abuse on you. Some historians point to the persecution of the church by Rome as being Nero's finding a handy scapegoat for the fire of Rome. And there's probably some validity to that. The problem is it doesn't take into consideration the fact that the persecution went on for 2.5 more centuries. Why was the church persecuted by Rome? Well, it's complicated. There's a lot of reasons. We probably don't even know them all. But here's what we know for sure. Rome, generally speaking, was very tolerant towards religion. In fact, pretty much if you were a Roman citizen, you could follow pretty much any religion you wanted as long as you also worshiped the emperor. So as long as you didn't cause any problems, you were good to go. The problem with Christianity was that there were two things that really kind of stuck in people's craw. The first was that there's this whole claim of exclusivity. This idea that Jesus is the only way, which is really kind of important to a Christian, but not so understandable to a Roman, because a Roman wanted to be able to say, well, whatever. Whatever works for you is fine, but don't tell me how I need to believe. Sounds familiar. And there's also this thing of sin that Christians said, everybody's a sinner. Nobody wants to be told that they're a sinner. So why were the Christians persecuted? The Christians were persecuted by what was a very tolerant empire because they were perceived to be intolerant. Nero said they were haters of humanity. You see, it was the Christian concept that Jesus is the only way, and that everyone is a sinner who needs Jesus, that really caused the persecution. If someone was a Christian and didn't want to be persecuted, it was very easy for them to avoid that persecution. All they had to do was not live like a Christian. You see, the reason the church was undergoing persecution, the reason that Christians in 1 Peter were suffering was because they were living like Christians. And Peter says, look, if you choose to live like Jesus, you're going to suffer. If you choose to live like Jesus, you're going to suffer. I cannot be a follower of Christ if I am afraid to suffer. How do I move from mirror to window? It's all about suffering. But I've got to understand, we're not talking about the kind of suffering that comes without reason. We are talking about the kind of suffering that I choose to bring on myself. Not by cutting my hand, but by following Christ. Because if I choose to follow Christ, I will suffer.